The summit in Geneva was supposed to be a formality, a showcase of unity among global powers amid mounting unrest in the Middle East. But it was anything but that. Inside the marble-walled hall of the United Nations Assembly, voices had grown tense. The room buzzed with whispers and darting glances. Then came the voice that split the silence like a blade through glass. Turkey and Qatar, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared, have chosen to undermine peace by aiding terrorists. Israel will not tolerate this interference. Let that be a warning. Cameras flashed. The room froze. Diplomats shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Turkish and Qatari delegations exchanged sharp looks, but before they could speak, another voice rose, calm but electric. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, dressed in his signature brown officer's uniform, stood. His presence alone was disarming, young, unshaken, and unbothered by decades of global hierarchy. You call them terrorists, Traoré began, eyes locked on Netanyahu. But the world is starting to see through your words. The real threat is a man who drops bombs on hospitals and calls it justice. A gasp rolled through the chamber. Netanyahu narrowed his eyes, standing straighter. Traoré continued, threatening Turkey and Qatar is not an act of strength. It's desperation. And you know what happens to desperate men? They get reckless. Dangerous. They must be stopped. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The entire room leaned in, not out of politeness, but awe. And in that moment, Netanyahu's threat seemed to shrink under the weight of something far more powerful, moral clarity. Netanyahu clenched his jaw. Cameras zoomed in as he leaned forward on the podium, trying to reclaim the spotlight. So now the soldier from Burkina Faso lectures Israel on security, he scoffed, his voice laced with disdain. Your words may impress the naive, Captain Traoré, but in the real world, we deal with facts. And the fact is, we fight terror, while your allies finance it. There was a brief silence. For a moment, it seemed as if Netanyahu had reasserted himself. But Traoré didn't flinch. He walked calmly to the microphone, pausing just long enough to let the weight of the moment settle like dust on a war-torn street. He didn't blink. Facts, Traoré said slowly. Let's talk facts. He raised a tablet and tapped the screen. Behind him, images began to flicker on the giant display, charred remains of hospitals in Gaza, lifeless bodies of children pulled from rubble, and aid workers shielding crying infants. These are your facts, he said. These are the receipts of your so-called justice. Gasps. Whispers. Then, silence again. Traoré stepped forward. You speak of terrorism while silencing journalists. You speak of peace while crushing the last breath from a trapped population. And now, you dare threaten the only nations offering food and shelter? He looked Netanyahu dead in the eyes. You're not just a danger to peace. You're a danger to humanity. The room erupted, not in argument, but in applause. Even delegates who once sat neutral found their hands clapping before their minds caught up. Netanyahu's mask, crafted from decades of rhetoric, was cracking. And Traoré? He wasn't finished. Netanyahu straightened his tie, eyes darting across the room, searching for an ally, any ally. The Israeli delegation stiffened behind him, their faces pale. Cameras flashed, but none dared interrupt the tension that hung like a blade between the two men. Traoré didn't wait. He turned from the podium and addressed the assembly directly, his voice sharp but calm, each word deliberate, cutting through the diplomatic fog like thunder through smoke. Let me be clear, he said, Burkina Faso stands with Turkey. We stand with Qatar. And we stand with every nation that refuses to kneel before tyranny. The hall stirred. Today it's threats. Tomorrow it's bombs. Netanyahu wants you to believe he's defending democracy. But we've seen this play before. It ends with mass graves and silent children. A gasp echoed from a Scandinavian delegate. A UN staffer dropped her pen. Traoré walked toward the floor, speaking now not to Netanyahu, but to the nations that listened with bated breath. This killer has crossed borders, buried truth, and now he wants war with those who feed the hungry, who shelter the wounded, who speak of peace. He paused, letting the silence ask the next question. What will you do when your flag is next? Suddenly, no one looked at Netanyahu. All eyes were on Traoré. The captain wasn't just confronting power, he was rewriting its rules. And the old order was. Netanyahu leaned into his microphone, trying to reclaim the room. These accusations are baseless. Israel has the right to defend itself. Turkey and Qatar harbor those who threaten that right. This is not aggression, it is necessity. But his voice cracked. Not from fear, at least not yet, but from the weight of Traoré's unrelenting calm. Because while Netanyahu spoke in rehearsed lines, Traoré had spoken from a place deeper than politics. And now, Traoré was smiling. It wasn't a smile of amusement, it was a warning. One forged in the fires of colonial betrayal, neo-colonial greed, and the silence of bodies buried without justice. It said, I've seen your games before. I'm not here to play them. Defend yourself? Traoré finally responded. By threatening sovereign nations that have never fired a bullet at you? By choking a border that delivers water and medicine to bombed children? His voice didn't rise, but the pressure in the room did. Netanyahu began to respond, but Traoré held up a hand. You threaten Turkey and Qatar because they do what you don't, they feed, they shelter, they care. And you call that a crime? A hush spread. Traoré stepped forward again, now nearly face to face. The only thing more dangerous than your missiles is your fear of being exposed. Suddenly, the cameras no longer framed Netanyahu as a leader defending his nation. They framed him as a man cornered by truth. And Traoré stood as the storm behind the smile. The chamber's air felt thicker now. Netanyahu's advisors exchanged panicked glances, silently urging him to pivot. But Traoré was not finished. He turned slightly, addressing not just the Israeli Prime Minister, but every nation watching. You want to know who the criminal is? Traoré asked, his gaze sweeping across the room. It's not Turkey. It's not Qatar. It's not the people resisting bombs with bare hands. He pointed, not at Netanyahu, but at the towering UN seal behind him. It's this body. This assembly. For decades, it's watched children die behind embargoes. It's calculated death tolls instead of saving lives. And now, when two nations dare send bread instead of bullets, you brand them enemies? Netanyahu interjected, that's propaganda. No, that's accountability, Traoré cut in, voice sharper now. You've built your career on the silence of the global north. But you mistake silence for support. And you mistake your allies' restraint for consent. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Traoré turned toward the camera lenses at the back of the hall, the eyes of the world. Let the world judge you, Netanyahu. Not through your words, but through the screams beneath your airstrikes. The ash of homes your drones erase. The children who dream only of surviving the night. And then, cold as steel, he added. Threaten Turkey. Threaten Qatar. Threaten anyone you want. But understand this, your threats don't frighten us anymore. They expose you. There was no applause. Just a silence so heavy it trembled. Netanyahu adjusted his tie, his jaw tight. He leaned toward the mic, attempting damage control. The state of Israel does not apologize for defending itself. We are a beacon of democracy surrounded by chaos. We act in self-defense. Always. But Traoré tilted his head and smirked. The kind of smirk that says, you just made it worse. Democracy, he echoed, laughing once, dry, sharp, surgical. You jail journalists, bomb hospitals, and blockade aid convoys. If that's democracy, then colonialism never ended. It just changed its name. The screen behind Traoré lit up, images of leveled Gaza neighborhoods, headlines of humanitarian crises, satellite images of Turkish and Qatari aid trucks halted at closed borders. And then, Traoré asked the room, if this is self-defense, then what does aggression look like? The murmurs swelled again. But this time, they weren't just murmurs. They were cracks forming in Netanyahu's support. Traoré continued, you speak of being surrounded by enemies. But it's not Israel that's isolated. It's you, Prime Minister. You've alienated your neighbors. You've lost the trust of your allies. And now, you attack those who send bread instead of bullets. Netanyahu's allies sat frozen. France. The UK. Even the US delegation hesitated. And then Traoré delivered the line that echoed past cameras, past borders. You called out to the world for loyalty, and all they gave you was silence. So ask yourself, who's isolated now? Netanyahu straightened in his seat, eyes narrowing. We have intelligence that shows Turkish and Qatari aid is being used to fuel terror, he said. Israel will not allow weapons masked as wheat to pass through Rafah. There it was, the pivot from defense to accusation. But Traoré didn't flinch. He leaned into the mic slowly, deliberately. You mean to tell us that baby formula is a threat? He asked. You mean to tell us bandages and blankets are fueling terrorism? A ripple of discomfort spread across the chamber. Traoré's voice rose, not in anger, but in moral clarity. When aid becomes your enemy, you are no longer defending your people. You are punishing the innocent. The screen behind him shifted again, this time to footage of Turkish doctors turned away at the border, Qatari food trucks halted in blistering desert heat. Children with sunken eyes and dust-covered cheeks flashed across the assembly screens. You speak of terror, Traoré continued, but terror isn't just a bomb. Sometimes, it's a sealed gate. A denied convoy. A leader too drunk on power to see the suffering he causes. He turned to Netanyahu and added, you've waged war on compassion. And now, you call those who deliver food your enemies. The room went dead silent. Not because they were shocked, because they were cornered by the truth. And then Traoré said what no other leader dared. Aid is not a threat. But you are. Traoré rose from his seat and slowly walked to the center of the hall. No podium. No microphone. Just his voice, steady, unflinching, and clear. I have watched your bombs fall. I have seen your soldiers laugh at suffering. And I've seen your diplomats call that peace, he began, his eyes fixed on Netanyahu. But here's what I haven't seen, humanity. He let the silence hang in the air. You can build walls, Prime Minister. But you cannot seal the will of a people. You can close Rafah, but the earth beneath it still breathes. A map of Gaza flickered to life behind him, overlaid with footage of protests in Istanbul, Doha, Johannesburg, and Paris. Millions in the streets. Children holding signs. Women chanting. The world wasn't waiting. Traoré raised a finger. Today, I'm not just the voice of Burkina Faso. I am the voice of every mother whose child starved behind your blockade. Every medic shot while reaching for a dying boy. Every imam who buried a child before a prayer. He turned, addressing the entire assembly now. If the gate doesn't open today, it will be forced open tomorrow. If not by diplomacy, then by the sheer gravity of justice. Rafah will open, with or without you. Netanyahu shifted uncomfortably in his seat, jaw clenched, fingers twitching. But he said nothing. Because what could he say? Traoré had spoken not with politics, but with back in Tel Aviv. Netanyahu stood before his cabinet, the footage of Traoré's speech looping silently on the screen behind him. His ministers were pale. His defense chief spoke first, voice low. Sir, if we don't respond, we look weak. But if we do, we escalate, another cut in, finishing the sentence everyone feared. Traoré's words weren't just defiance. They were a signal. To millions. To allies. To the global south. To those Israel could no longer bully into silence. Netanyahu pounded the table. He's bluffing. Burkina Faso can't reach us. But intelligence briefings told another story. New military ties between Sahel nations. Turkish and Qatari statements echoing Traoré's speech. African ambassadors walking out of Israel's latest UN presentation. A massive demonstration in London chanting, "Open Rafah, or we shut you down." Traoré had become the face of something bigger. Not a warlord. A movement. And Netanyahu knew movements were harder to bomb than bunkers. He stared at the screen as Traoré's final words replayed. If the gate doesn't open today, it will be forced open tomorrow. Netanyahu stood, this time not with bravado, but with hesitation. Prepare a statement, he muttered. One, with options. His generals looked at each other, because for the first time in years, Netanyahu wasn't commanding the battlefield. He was reacting to it. And the man setting the pace? Was in Ouagadougou. In a hall packed with cameras, journalists, and flashing lights, Ibrahim Traoré stepped up to a podium in Ouagadougou, not to gloat, but to declare. The room held its breath. There was a time, he began, when men like Netanyahu could terrorize nations in the shadows, behind iron gates and soft words of diplomacy. That time is dead. Screens worldwide streamed the moment. His tone wasn't theatrical, it was surgical. To threaten Turkey, to threaten Qatar, to bomb children in Rafah and then speak of peace, this is not leadership. It is rot. Some Western analysts scoffed. But others leaned forward. Because Traoré wasn't just making noise, he was building leverage. One sentence at a time. We are not here to beg. We are not here to kneel. We are here to remind the world, if a gate is used to starve the innocent, then it is no longer a gate, it is a weapon. And weapons aimed at civilians must be dismantled. Crowds erupted across cities from Tunis to Dakar, from Istanbul to Jakarta. The Traore Doctrine was born, clear, moral, and unyielding. Netanyahu's team, watching in silence from a bunker-like war room, had no reply. Because for once, the conversation wasn't about Israel's defense, it was about its denial. And while they strategized, the world moved on without them. Traoré stepped down from the podium and looked straight into the lenses pointed at him. We do not ask the old empires for permission, he said. History never has. He stood tall, eyes unwavering, voice forged in fire. You can shut the gates of Rafah. You can drop bombs on children. You can silence the media. But you cannot bury the truth. I was not born to watch. I was not raised to bow. I came to speak where others whisper. To stand where others fall. And to fight when the world looks away. He scanned the hall, leaders shifting in their seats, journalists frozen mid-sentence. I do not fear your sanctions. I do not fear your armies. I fear only silence. And I refuse to be silent. Then he raised a single finger, steady, pointed toward the cameras. If that makes me dangerous, so be it. Because change never came from those who played it safe. It came from those who dared to speak when it was forbidden. And tonight, remember this. Your power ends where our courage begins. The room erupted. The world listened. And history took note.